Good day. This is Josh Belk with the Belk on Business podcast. Today we're going to talk a little bit about participation in meetings. How do we show up for a meeting? How should we participate in a meeting? And of course, meetings are kind of one of those things that are unnecessary evil. Think of some businesses, they may have team meetings. I know with my accounting firm, we do every Monday morning, same time. It's hard on the schedule. It's hard written in the schedule. Everybody shows up. Unless you're out of the office for some reason, it's kind of one of those things. We shut everything down and we meet for maybe 30 minutes, an hour, once a week. And but in that meeting, there's a lot of very important things that we kind of walk through and we discuss. It's kind of one of those scheduled meetings, and you may have one of those in your business as well, or you may, if you're an employee, participate in one of those meetings each and every week. But of course, there are a lot of other meetings that take place. And meetings many times are kind of have a negative stigma about them. They aren't liked. They're boring. They're not productive. They're not purposeful. You kind of hear that laundry list of kind of complaints that generally you hear about meetings, to the point that even there's a book entitled, you hear the phrase, death by meeting, and spend so much time talking about the work and not actually getting the work done, talking about what we're going to do instead of actually execution and doing it. Now, if you're a business owner listening to this, or you're in a position to where you hold meetings, hopefully this will be a little bit productive for you, and especially for those of you who have to participate in these meetings. How do you know how to show up? When should you speak? When should you not speak? And we'll talk a little bit about that on today's podcast. So, when you're most of the time we think meetings generally should be fewer. Probably we should have fewer of them in our businesses, but when they are necessary, when they are required, that it is very clear and concise as to what is the purpose of this meeting, what are we trying to accomplish, and also to make sure that agenda is provided ahead of time. I was on a very large board for a number of years, and I think one of the most frustrating items that I had, and of course being an officer on that board, was that an agenda was never provided. We walked into a meeting. We had a meeting once a month, and we'd walk into this meeting, and I would have generally no idea. I knew what my part was, but I had no idea what is the purpose of the meeting. What are we supposed to be discussing? Why are we even meeting? And very rarely was any of this communicated beforehand, and I think this is true probably for most meetings. It's kind of one of those things that, hey, we need to get together and discuss X, Y, Z, but without any sort of detail, without any sort of ultimate agenda or goal of where are we trying to go in this particular meeting. So when you're in a meeting, whether or not you're holding the meeting or hosting the meeting, or whether or not you're a participant, whether willing or unwilling, into the meeting, what are some questions you may want to ask before you speak up in a meeting, or maybe even before you even get involved in a meeting, as we talked about a bit before, and I'll talk about this in the last point as we go through this. So first of all, how do I show up prepared? So how do I show up prepared? And this is kind of one of those things that most of the time, if someone requests a meeting, I'm going to respond and simply state, yes, I'm more than happy to attend, provided that an agenda is provided beforehand and we are clear as to the objectives of the meeting. So those are generally the two things I categorically require before I will attend a meeting. And if you're a business owner like I am, maybe own multiple businesses like I do, it becomes one of those things to where our time is limited. So we only have so many hours in our work week, and we can't be spending it, wasting it on idle talk or unproductive meetings. So beforehand, maybe one of those things, if you're requested to come to a meeting, to simply reach out and simply state, more than happy to, understand this is, probably needs my involvement, but can you please provide an agenda for the meeting? And then what is it we are trying to accomplish? What is the one thing or the two things that we are trying to accomplish in this meeting? So that we were very, very clear on our end goal, our purpose of meeting, and then also what is the pathway that essentially the host of the meeting or the person holding the meeting has put together to kind of get us there, or who are the participants in the meeting that we're going to be working with, so we know how to kind of work together to be able to get the goal accomplished. So how do I show up prepared? So once you receive that agenda, and you have the purpose for the meeting, kind of glancing through it and saying, okay, what are the areas that I definitely am going to be involved in? And most of the time when we're called into a meeting, for myself, generally it's going to involve the finances of the business. Okay, so generally in some form or fashion, maybe sometimes a little bit of business strategy, or maybe an asset management conversation, something to that effect. But most of the time, it has to do with tax, it has to do with finance, it has to do with something involving the numbers side of the business. And so I'm going to first kind of glance through that agenda and say, okay, this is where they're expecting me to participate. This is why they asked. And then to also, so I'm going to make sure that I'm very, very well versed. If I'm getting called into a meeting, and it's kind of one of these things that we need to do a deep dive into financials. I know that I better go through, do my homework, have the financials, look through them, understand some of the problem points, so I can come in and tell the story as it relates to their numbers, to their financials, and as it relates to the context of the overall meeting. So look into those areas where you may be asked to contribute. Make sure that you've done the work. You've done a deep dive into what is going to be required of you. And then those other agenda items that you may not be involved in. So maybe you kind of glance through, and maybe there's a marketing component, and you're involved in the finance side. Okay, it's going to be one of those things. But I may have a kind of a good understanding of kind of the overall, marketing plan for the business. Where are we trying to go? How are we trying to market the product or the service? And to kind of have a general understanding, so we at least can understand the conversation, although we may not and probably should not even contribute to those particular areas. Okay, so first of all, how do I show up prepared? Next, is what I am going to say, is it on point and is it necessary? Is it on point and is it necessary? A lot of times, and I can be guilty of this too. I love telling, kind of little stories and anecdotes and things that just kind of lighten up the mood. And I say, well, I'm just trying to add to the culture, whatever the case may be. But that can really frustrate team members. That can frustrate even leadership if you're in a meeting and you're doing this. Okay, so if you're saying things that aren't on point to the agenda, aren't on point to the purpose, and just simply isn't necessary to be said. A lot of times we feel like we need to speak up, so we feel like we participated, or that we're noticed, or that we are involved. Okay, but many times we speak up, and we speak up errantly or without purpose or unnecessarily or off point. That's going to make us essentially look less valuable, and because we are less valuable. Okay, so is what I'm going to say, is it on point and is it necessary? Many times we want to say things that are self-serving. We want to say things that simply, we're wanting to echo. Well, I, echo what this person said. I agree with this, whatever the case may be. That's most of the time not exactly pointless or necessary to reiterate a point that somebody else has said. Okay, that's just going to lengthen the meeting, and it essentially, it's going to devalue you as a person and an individual involved in that particular meeting and in that company. Number 3 is what you say, does it bring a different perspective to the topic? So if you're gonna speak up, once again, not echoing or simply, I agree with that, or just simply rehash the same words that somebody else just said. Okay, but is what you're saying, does it bring a little bit of a unique perspective? Because maybe you work with different clients, maybe you have a different background or different experiences, maybe you're working in a different company, or maybe you're working in a different department, and maybe things are done a little bit differently, and you may want to speak up and say, from some of my experience and from what I see here, maybe this is something we can consider, and just a different perspective. It may not be 100% accurate or 100% definitely the direction that the decision maker is going to decide upon, but it's going to provide additional information because it does provide a unique perspective, a different way of looking at things. And of course, I think that's true in a lot of areas of life, that we should be consuming maybe different perspectives on things, especially maybe those things that are closely held beliefs, to make sure that that the direction that we're going, the things that we're saying, and the way that we're leading is the best manner of leading and kind of directing that group that we are involved with. Number 4 is what we're going to say, is what I'm going to say, is it based on facts or is it based on feelings? And I can't tell you how many times I've been in meetings, and of course, being an accountant, and people have different perspectives on numbers, especially as to the why. Okay, why did we get here? Why aren't things working? And I can't tell you how many times I've been in meetings and I have the data. I come and I have the data to show that, this variable is completely unrelated to this variable, but the person in the meeting just simply is just dead set on their perspective, that they feel that doing this is going to result in this, even though the data doesn't prove it. And so to make sure that you're showing up and you're, first of all, not simply just speaking your closely held beliefs or your emotions, even though they may not be based on fact, Okay, but you're showing up and you understand, and if it's in your area, that we come with the information that's necessary. You've done the research, you've done the work, and then if you're involved in the meeting, if someone else has facts that may go in contrary to the way that you see things, to make sure you accept it as well. So if you're the one doing the speaking, make sure that what you're saying isn't simply just emotion. Well, I feel like that if we did this, this would happen. Okay, well, it may be true, that may be what happened, but is there evidence, is there some sort of fact to back up your perspective or your essentially otherwise just becomes opinion on the situation? So, whether we're talking about the relationship between variables or we talked about marketing here a few minutes ago, well, we feel that, if we market in this way, that it's going to result in this. Well, okay, if we've done market research, have other companies tried this and did they get the result that you think that it may end up resulting? Or you just feel that doing billboard advertising or putting a wrap on a vehicle is going to provide something that the evidence simply would just show otherwise. So operating in facts will allow for ownership of problems and solutions and moves an organization closer to executable items over just emoting as to how we got here and simply wanting to cast blame, or we say we can't control variables, whatever the case may be. But to really show up, have the facts, operate within those facts, and make the decision based on the facts presented. Number 5, how do I say what needs to be said in a concise manner? How can what I say and what needs to be said in a concise manner? Don't be going off on rabbit trails, to make sure that whatever we say is on point. It's concise, and it brings the group collectively to a place of understanding, so we can essentially get the meeting concluded. We get to the end result that we're looking for, and not holding a group sabotage a group simply because we have a story we want to tell, or we don't feel like we're appreciated, and we just have to speak up just to have our voice heard because we feel like that maybe we aren't performing well enough, or we're just insecure. Okay, so show up to those meetings, making sure that you're concise with what you have to say. What you have to say is well researched, that you understand the topic at hand, you've done the work before you show up for a meeting. If everybody shows up to a meeting with these questions answered, okay, let me run back through this. Are you showing up prepared? Have I reviewed the items? Am I understanding where I need to be involved? And have I studied and have I done the work? Number 2, is what I'm saying, is it on point and is it necessary to be said? Number 3 is what I'm saying, does it bring a unique or different perspective to the topic? Next, number 4 is what I'm saying, is it emotional or is it based on facts? Am I operating in facts or am I operating in my feelings? Then lastly, how do I say what needs to be said in a clear and concise manner? If everybody shows up to a meeting doing these things, I truly think that a meeting is going to be productive, and whatever the goals are, the ultimate goals for that meeting will be met, and then everybody will leave that meeting feeling like they've contributed, that they brought value, other people brought value, and then the overall goal, the company's been moved forward and the goals were met that were preset prior to the meeting. Once again, this is Josh Belk with the Belk on Business podcast. Hope this particular podcast brought you some value. If you haven't already, please consider subscribing on whatever platform that you're listening to. Have a wonderful day.